Well, I'm not sure what happened to the recording through GoToMeeting. Something went awry, and I got a 640 by 480 video of the top corner, so it wasn't really that helpful. So I thought I'd re-record this, and thought a couple of other things that I might do. So I'm going to show you how to create a new project, and also if any of you guys want to join this project, I'm going to call it a Glowforge project, and it's a place where we can build things and share things out through the community. So I'm just going to call it Glowforge. Create that, and then if anybody wants in, I can put a link up there. You can ask to join, and I'll just accept anybody that wants to join and see projects there. And part of this may be that I may want to add something like an icon and a few things, which I'll show you how we can do that later. But I'm going to pin that to the top, so you can create a new project pretty easily. I'm going to come into that project, and you can see that there's nothing in there yet. I could add people in here, which at some point you'll see people in there, but I'm going to close this for right now, and I'm going to create a new design. So similar to what we saw in our GoToMeeting today, I'm going to start out with a sketch in the top view, and part of that, I'm going to turn on my origin so I can see that 0, 0, 0, which will be helpful as we move on in this design. And I'm also going to change from a 2-point rectangle to a center point. So in my little sketch palette, you can change that on the fly, and we'll drag out the size of my rectangle. I'm also going to come in and draw a couple of horizontal lines here and here. I'm not really too worried about where I place them, and then a couple of vertical lines there and there. I am trying to get them straight. You'll notice that it snaps them into place, but let's say by chance I accidentally put one in there that's not straight. You can either delete it and recreate it. That's a fast way to do it. You can also come over to your sketch palette and pick vertical horizontal and pick it, and it'll snap up vertical. And all of this now, as I drag these things around, you can see how it all updates. But I'm going to come in with some dimensions and say, let's do the dimension of the total width of this. We'll do something like 100, and we'll do something like on the side, we could do something like 75. Now what if we wanted to do some kind of equation there? So maybe we want this to be half of the 100 at all times. If I edit this dimension, you'll notice when I hover over the value, it tells me D1 is 100 millimeters. Well, I can use that D1 here. If I just type in lowercase d1, you'll notice that it makes it 100 millimeters. And it's always going to follow whatever I do to that D1 dimension. If I go up to 75, they both go to 75. I can also do things like D1 divided by 2. So it's always going to be half of the 75. I could say D1 divided by 2 plus 25. So you have a lot of capabilities that you can come in and do. But in this case, I'm just going to say D1, so it's equal. We're also going to come in and add some dimensions here. We'll say that that's something like 5 millimeter. And similar to what we did today in our little webinar, if I double click here, same thing, D3. Now I can say the dimension here and here is going to be D3. And the dimension here and here is D3. And I can also see when I do that, there's a little FX, although I don't think I hit the right thing there. D3. There we go. There's a little FX next to the icons that are driven dimensions. Those are dimensions that are it's using some other dimension. So here I can see doesn't have an FX, it's just the value, and then I can see these have an FX. So I know here if I change that to be 10, all those others are going to change. If I go to 8 or 5 again, they all update. So that's in the sketching, that's a really easy way to lay that out. And from here, I'm just going to save this, and we'll say for the first time we created, the name of this, we'll do a box. And we'll save it. From here, we're going to come in and say, all right, we want to extrude one of these up. So you can either come down to, under Create, you can come to Extrude. Press Pull is kind of a universal command that does a lot of different things. So oftentimes you may want to start there. If I use Press Pull and I pick the area that I want to extrude, you'll notice that it goes to an Extrude command. If I pick an edge, it's actually going to fill at that edge. So it does many different things instead of having to pick a number of different commands. But let's extrude that up at something like 75 millimeters. That might be a little tall. Maybe we'll go 50. Something like that. Let's see. There we go. We'll say 50. The sketch gets turned off, so I'm going to expand the sketches and turn that one off. And I may even rename this and say something like base sketch. So you can name pretty much anything in there. You can see my timeline as I'm creating this. When I go to extrude the second one, I could just pick the top face and it's joining these together as one component or one body. In this case, I probably want multiple bodies, but I also don't know exactly how. I want to set this up where if I change one value, all sides update. So before I extrude that up, I'm going to go to my parameters, and you can get that from here. Change parameters, and underneath that extrude, we can see here that D7 is 50 millimeters. Well, I'm just going to I could keep it D7, but I want it to be something more recognizable, like height. And I might even make that a favorite where it shows up at the top all the time. And I could probably do that with that first sketch with this 5 millimeter value that is the thickness of my material. Maybe I'll do thickness. So those are two parameters I'm probably going to use a fair amount: the overall height of this box and the thickness of material that I use. So now I can come back and say, let's grab that, drag it up, and here I'll say height and make sure that I make a new body out of it. So now those two share that height parameter. So if I come in and say let's make the height 75, they both update. If I say let's change the thickness of this to be 10 millimeters, it updates. We'll say 5. Let's go back in there, say 5 there, and maybe we'll do 65 here. So it looks pretty good. We'll finalize this with grabbing that, dragging it up as a body, and the distance is going to be height. And I'm going to right click, repeat press pull, drag up, new body with the height. And I'll do right click, repeat press pull on that, pull that up, new body, and then this one is the thickness, which I don't have in here yet, so we'll just say thick. Whoop, did not mean to do that. Let's change that back to, there we go. Alright, let's pull that up and we'll say thickness with a new body. So I have 5 new bodies. If I look over in the bodies directory, I have the 5 of them, and I can even come in and say that is that is the left. Now we'll say that's the front, back. You don't have to do this, but it makes it kind of nice when you're working on it to be able to make edits and see all of those. And I may also want to convert these at some point to components. So those are all bodies, and usually when I'm laying something out I may use bodies, and then at some point I may say let's make components out of all of those. I probably should have waited to name those after I made components, because it doesn't maintain that. But so here these are their own individual components that I can kind of dissect, pull apart, and snap back together. But components react a little different than bodies, and that's probably a bit separate conversation, kind of exactly components and bodies. But you can create something that's a body, and it's kind of flexible for conceptual design and laying things out. And then you can make components and figure out, these two components go in as a subassembly, and I can turn those off together. These two go together, and I can kind of group and turn those on and off. So there are things you can do like that. But at any rate, let's bring those back together. And we may also want to come in and apply some material. So the physical material of this, we may come in and say that the physical material is something like walnut. Maybe we'll do a walnut there, and I can drag it to the top level and apply it everywhere. And then it may be that I want a different visual appearance. So, it may be that you want to paint them white, but you want a physical property of oak. Here, if I right click and go to properties, you'll notice that it tells me that the physical material is walnut, and it has all the area mass density of that component with that material. So if I change it to be aluminum, it's going to have different properties. So that's a good way to, if you're worried about weight or various information, you can get it there. I'm going to go to appearance though, and we have some new solid wood options that I think look a little bit nicer. So I can download the semi-gloss walnut and drag it on a face, and we can see that. So it may be that here, let's we just apply it on all faces. You can see the end material, the side material. This is kind of cool. If you go to one of those like the base, let's say you don't want it to show the end grain, you want it to look a little different, you can come in and say let's go to texture map control, and with that, let's see if I can get a good angle here so you can see this. I can actually rotate that wood grain so that the wood grain is going the long direction instead of the top direction. So it's kind of cool that you can really adjust that how you want. And if you're looking at rendering this and make it look pretty nice, you have a lot of control. Okay, so once we have that, I'm going to save this. We'll say that we have the walls, and from here, we have that. It's easy for us to come in and say, let's change that to be 10 millimeters. Everything gets thicker. Let's say it's 25 millimeters tall. So you can see how flexible it is once you've created that kind of the layout that you want, how easy you can come in and modify those things. So if you spend a little bit of time up front, it makes it a lot easier downstream making some of those modifications if it's something that you're going to use a bit. Let's go to 70. Okay, so now with that in place, I'm going to turn that base sketch off and the origin, and I'm going to cut a couple of things on each of the faces. So we'll go to the right face, and let's say that we just want to offset the edges and cut a rectangle through there that's offset. So let's just cut that through. You can see that we now have a hole that goes through there. If I wanted to put a nice little fillet on the edges, I could use press pull, grab the edges there. And you may wonder how I'm orbiting around. If I hit the shift and the middle mouse key on my mouse, so hold the shift key down and the middle wheel, hold it down and pan around, and you'll notice that it allows you to orbit in 3D space pretty nice. And then if you don't hold the shift key, you just hold your middle mouse, you can pan. If you roll your middle mouse, if it has a roller wheel, you can zoom in and out. So it makes it pretty easy. But you can see here that we can fillet that edge a bit. Probably not something you'd use on the laser cutter, but if I wanted to put like a chamfer around that edge, you could chamfer it as well, and you can see that material is just awesome. But you can chamfer that and get a nice chamfer on the edge. I'm going to delete that chamfer so I can just right click on it in the timeline, delete it, and get rid of it. Let's go to the front view of this. In fact, not the front. Let's go to the left view, and we're going to place a sketch on here. And this time we may want to use a polygon, and we'll do something like, we'll find the midpoint there and come over, and I'm going to do 3 sides. Let's go here to number of sides. We'll do 3, so it's a triangle. Drag it down a little bit. So now I have a triangle there. I want this bottom edge to be horizontal. I want it to be, parallel with the ground. So I'm just going to say that we're going to make it horizontal. So now, I can drag that around a little bit. If I wanted to change the size of this, I can put a dimension from this base edge to the top and say, maybe we want it to be 50 millimeters. It's going to grow for me. And it may also be that I want to find the center of this box. So we'll say, let's come down here, and we may have, that may be the center, but we'll draw a line there, and then let's no, I think that's the center. Let's do that one more time. We'll find, oh, I think it is in the midpoint there. So let's drag that over. Let me undo that so we can see. When I place this, let's grab one of the edges. You can see that I can move it around. Well, let's pull it down here just for a minute. And when I draw these lines, you know, I may want, we'll make this a construction line in a second, but I can find the midpoint of this line here, kind of track over. So that is the dead center of this box. And there are a couple ways of getting that, but that's the dead center. And I'm just going to turn those into construction lines so they don't show up if I try to extrude this. And then from here I can also say, let's just grab that point and that point, snap them together, and we can see where that is. Now it may not be, you know, looking at this, that may not be quite where I want it to be. So instead we may say, let's put this on the edge and not the point. So now that I can move this up or down kind of where I want. So it's centered side to side, but up and down I can kind of eyeball or put a dimension off of the bottom down here to kind of place it where I want. Maybe we do 10 millimeters. So once I have that, then we can come in and say, let's just extrude that through my part. Let's make sure I grab the right thing. There we go. Pull that through. So now we've cut that. And then the final one, let's go to the back. And I'm going to create a sketch that's going to go from one corner to the other corner. And for fun, we're just going to use a slot. We'll just do something like from there to there. And we may want to place a specific dimension here so we know it's the same on both sides. So I'm going to pick center and center. And you'll notice when I do that, let's just pick center, center. And it's allowing me to place a dimension here. There we go. So when I'm placing this, if I come close to that edge, if I pick, it's allowing me to pull in a line dimension. I can also right click and say align vertical or horizontal. So if I do horizontal, you can see that it's locking horizontal, vertical, or aligned to the 2 points that I've picked, which is kind of handy. And we'll do something like 15 millimeters there, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll say aligned. We'll go from point to point. Looks like I'm not, there we go. So make sure everything's deselected and make sure I'm just getting those points. Right click, aligned, and we'll say 15. Alright, so with that we can say let's just grab each of those sides, cut them in. So I have a slot. What if I want that to be an X? I could come in with my mirror command and say we want to use, I can pattern faces, bodies, or features, and I'm going to do a feature, and we're going to grab that feature from the browser. And then I can also here, for the selection, I'm going to use the mid plane here, the origin. I can grab that plane, since if you created the sketch right in the dead center, it's easy to grab that plane. So that works. Now in case you didn't do that, one of the things you could do is grab this mid-plane option, so under construction mid-plane, and you could pick plane or face 1, face 2, and it gives you a plane right in the center of those two. And regardless how big of offset you get, that plane will always be in the middle. But if we've constructed this correctly, I should be able to come in now and try things out and say, well, let's make this 8 millimeters wide, and we'll say 100 millimeters tall. And we can see it compute all of that. So all the parameters and everything I've put in there. Now there may be some things that I'd want to adjust. I don't have all of these things parametrically tied in so that everything updates 100%. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. You may want to come in and add a little bit more intelligence so that it's exactly where you want, or centered, or any of that good stuff. So with that, let's take a look at that sketch there. It looks like that didn't stay horizontal. That's kind of interesting. So let's do this. And when you run into things like this, it's easy to fix. In this case, we'll delete that, and I'm just going to pull that down and redrag that over. So there are some things you can do if you run into these things that aren't updating like you would expect. And sometimes if it's acting funny, you can, like in that case, we'll get rid of that line, and I'll just draw another line in there. So we'll go point to point and drag that there, and you can see here too, it looks like I don't have a tangency. I don't think I put a last tangency on that last edge. So we'll say pick both of those edges. It gives me a nice tangency on that sketch, and you kind of get how you can do that. And I could place all the dimensions in there, but in this case I think we're in good shape. So the final thing I'm going to do is let's add a couple of gears on here, and maybe let's save this, and then I might add some different materials on here real quick. So let's just go to the appearance, and we may want this to be more of like a kid's toy. So I'm going to go to plastic and say, red, green, yellow, and maybe we'll make the bottom just a black, or maybe we'll even do transparent on the bottom. We'll say plastic transparent and place that on there. So we get something like that, and let's save that. Now here I'm going to go to one of my add-ins that I really like. It's just a little gear generator, and I'm going to tell it that we want 24 teeth at 5mm thickness. Hit OK. So that created one gear for me. We can see what that looks like. And then let's create another spur gear. Let's go to script, spur gear, and this one we're going to do 8 at 5mm. So we have two gears, and I'm just going to look from the side here. Let's just grab both of those and pull. There we go. Make sure we don't get the yellow part. I'm going to pull them over kind of where I think would be a good spot. Make sure we get them both. Kind of a good spot, and then we'll go to, although I want those to be on the back face, so let's pull those over to the other face. And I'm eyeballing this right now. Let's just say that it's a little toy. I'm not too worried about the exact location of the gears, but I do want them to mesh. So we'll do something like that. That should work okay. If I'm doing these with metal or something that's more of a precise thing, then I adjust them a bit more appropriately with get the engineer's the handbook and figure out what the center distances needed to be with the gears that I've specified, or hand calc it. But in this case, we're just going to drag them. Let's take a snapshot to keep the location of them, and then I'm just going to come in and say let's create a sketch there. I'm going to use the project command and say let's project that face and that face, and what that will do now, let's turn off those gears. So now I have the location of them, and I can use that for my hole. So I can say, I've kind of eyeballed that where I want. Now I'm just going to zoom in there, make sure I get the right point. Let's grab that point right there and say let's go depth. We can use thickness here. We want to go through the entire part, and 3mm is okay for the diameter. Let's turn that sketch back on, and we'll zoom in here. We're going to repeat that hole, and we'll place it there. 3 millimeters, we'll say thickness. Okay, so that way, if my plate, if the thickness of my material changes, that hole will always go through that as well. Okay, so we have those, and now I can just say, let's grab my joint command, and I'm going to grab the outer cylinder and the inner cylinder there, the diameter of the hole, and one of the faces of that gear. And we may even want to offset it 1 millimeter. We'll do a -1, so it offsets it out from the face. Hit OK. Now, real quick, you'll notice as I try to drag that, it's grabbing and dragging the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ground the floor, the bottom piece, right click and hit ground. So now it can't move around. And I'm going to use an as-built joint. And what the as-built joint is, it's constructed in the right location. I just want to weld it to the other components. So I say the back and the bottom, weld them together with a rigid joint. The side, bottom, make them rigid. The other component, make those rigid. So now they're all tied together. In fact, if I turned off that, if I suppressed that ground and moved it, you'd see that they all move together. So let's unsuppress that ground so it's locked down. So now when I drag this, we can see that gear looks pretty cool with that walnut wood grain. But I can drag it and see what that looks like. I'm going to revert its original position, and then we're going to come in with a regular joint again, and we're going to say grab, let's just grab that face right there, and the hole, we'll tell it to be a revolute at a -1 also. So now those look pretty good. I don't have a shaft, they're just kind of floating in space, but they work. So now I can drag that, and I could come in and turn on contact, but contact is a little tricky with all the different faces that it's touching here. As it's rotating around, you know, that's not a simple solve. So a good thing that we can do is do a motion link, and this is a little bit more of an advanced features, but I can do a motion link and say, you know, I want these things to rotate together, and we want to reverse the order, and then I want to take this first one, and it was 8 teeth, and the second one was 24. Looks like I need to do the other direction. 24 teeth by 8, so that's just the gear ratio, and there we go. So now as I drag that, I can see that work, and just for fun, then I can start getting a little bit more advanced where we'll capture that position and we'll say, you know, on that gear, it may be that we're going to come in with a spline, and we'll just do something like that, some funky little shape here. Let's pull that in a little bit and adjust that. So then let's extrude that in a bit. We'll give it a thickness, and I could just for fun even say let's do a press pull, and you know, we could put a fillet. We'll do like a 1 millimeter fillet on that, and that may be, I don't know how deep it is, let's do 0.5. Oh, let's see. Well, thinking about how that's going to cut with our Glowforge anyway, for a laser, we probably don't necessarily want it on there. But you know, I could put a fillet on there if I wanted. But let's come in and just say let's pattern that feature around the axis there, and let's make sure we have it as a feature. There we go. So I've cut that out a bit, and you can kind of see what that's going to look like. So we're in pretty good shape there. I'm going to save that. We'll say final design, and for the fun of it, you know, we also want to be able to cut this out. So I'm not going to worry too much about keeping everything in the right plane, but we want to create a DXF of this. So I'm going to go to my move command, and I'm going to say let's come right here. wrong component. Let's go there. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees, and we'll say come out. And you know, if I am wanting to be very precise, I can use this point to point, and I can say move that to that, and then let's move that out a little bit. So that point to point is kind of cool. And I could do the same thing with this one. I could say grab that guy, and let's say point to point here, only we want to move that up a little bit. So I go back to triad, and let's come here, say let's move that guy out 90 degrees. Let's go point to point, say let's move that to that, back to triad, scoot that over, and I can key in the value too if I want that to be super precise. And then let's grab that bottom face, let's rotate it, and we'll say point to point, and then we'll move it down. So in really not a lot of time, and I may even shift that over a little bit, not much time, we're able to lay those out. Let's also come in and say let's grab one of those gears. In fact, maybe we do both of them, but we'll say move that over there, move that right there, and from here I'm going to save this as a layout. Now the nice thing is, when I want to see this all back together, I can grab my end of part, move it over to the move it forward. I could even grab all of these and group them together so it's in one group, and I can roll forward and we're all together, roll back, it's all apart. So this is a really part of the history that can be really handy. But I'm going to create a sketch on this face, and with that I'm going to use the project command. I'm going to say project each of these faces. We'll grab each of those, stop that, and let's turn off each of these components. So now we can see in this one sketch we have all the geometry that we would need to cut this out. So from that I can go to that sketch, and I may even rename that sketch as layout. I can right click on it and tell it to save as DXF, and we'll say, I don't know why I keep doing bot, but we'll do Glowforge box 001 on my desktop. So then I can go to my desktop and look at that. We'll open that up through AutoCAD, and this is the one that we just barely created. Do a zoom extents, and you can see what that looks like. So pretty easy for us to get that out. I can go back and make changes to my model. You know, it's a beauty about the parametrics. If I came in and said, well, really, I want that to be 70, let's say 65 millimeters, updated it. So now all the sketches are already up to date, or that one sketch. So I just need to re-export that out as a DXF, and the way I'd go. So notice if I go back to 75 and hit enter, 75, enter, you're going to notice that that shifts up. So I'm going to turn that sketch off, roll back, and turn all these other components on so we can see it. And we're good to go. Let's just save this as our final design. We're good to go. So hopefully that helps kind of learn a number of things with Fusion 360, how to get in and get working. If you're interested, you can join the project here. You can see the design file and play around with it, see if you have any questions. So hopefully that helps.